When two siblings were abandoned with nothing, they bought a derelict military bunker on a forgotten plot of land. But the secrets buried inside would force them to confront a past they never knew they had. If you've ever felt lost or forgotten, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're building a community here for people who know what it's like to start over from nothing. The day I turned 16 was the day I legally ceased to exist, at least as far as the state was concerned. There was no cake, no off-key singing, just a thin manila folder on a scratched metal desk and the tired eyes of my caseworker, Ms. Albright. She slid the folder across the desk. It made a dry, scraping sound, the official soundtrack of my life ending and beginning all at once. Inside were my walking papers, release forms, a final stipend check for an amount that felt like an insult, and a bus token. 1. I was 16, an adult, free. The word felt like a lie, a bitter pill coated in cheap sugar. For 2 years, since I was 14, I'd been a ward of the state. Before that, it was a string of foster homes, each one a different shade of beige, a different set of rules I learned to break quietly. My sister Maya was 14 now. She was still in the system, but my emancipation meant she was my responsibility. It was a cruel, bureaucratic loophole. The state couldn't legally care for her if she had a legal guardian. And as of 9:03 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, that guardian was me. A 16-year-old boy with a backpack, a sister who looked at him like he knew the answers, and a future that was a sheer, blank wall. Ms. Albright sighed, a puff of air that smelled faintly of coffee and disappointment. Not in me, necessarily, in the whole broken machine. "Leo," she started, her voice raspy. She'd been a social worker for 20 years. I could see every one of them in the lines around her mouth. "This is it. The stipend should get you a week in a motel, maybe 2 if you're smart about it. After that..." She trailed off, shrugging. After that was the wall. "What about Maya?" I asked, my voice flat. I already knew the answer, but I had to ask. For Maya. She was waiting for me outside, sitting on the curb, kicking at a loose piece of asphalt. "Her case is closed, pending transfer of guardianship. To you." She tapped a form with a polished, unadorned fingernail. "You're her family now, her only family." The words were meant to be a fact, but they landed like a sentence. I stared at the folder, at the black and white finality of it all. 2 years of group homes. 2 years of counting down the days until I was out, thinking freedom was some golden, sunlit place. Now that I was here, it just felt cold. It felt like falling. I pushed the chair back, ready to leave, to go collect my sister and walk into the great, terrifying unknown. "Wait," Ms. Albright said. She hesitated, her professional mask slipping for just a second. She reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out something else. It wasn't an official document. It was a small, square envelope, yellowed with age, its edges soft as cloth. It looked like something you'd find pressed in an old book. This is not part of the file," she said, her words careful, precise. "This came for your mother years ago, after you two were already in the system. It was sent to the last known address and eventually found its way into her property box. When she was declared gone, the box was supposed to be destroyed, standard procedure." She looked at the door, then back at me. "I held on to it. I don't know why. It just felt wrong to throw it away." She slid it across the desk. It was heavier than it looked. My name and Maya's were not on it, only our mother's. a woman I barely remembered, a ghost who existed only in the fractured memories of a 4-year-old. I picked it up. The paper was thick. "What is it?" "I don't know. I never opened it. It's not my place." She stood up, a signal that our time was officially over. "Leo, the world is not kind to kids like you. You know that. Be smart, smarter than they expect you to be, and look after your sister." I nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't form words. I just took the official folder and the unofficial envelope and walked out of the room without looking back. The hallway was long and smelled of disinfectant. Freedom smelled like bleach. Maya was right where I left her, her small frame hunched over her knees. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wide and dark. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to make my voice sound steady, confident, like a guardian, like a brother who had a plan. "It's done. We're on our own now." She stood up and brushed the dust from her jeans. She didn't smile, but a little of the tension left her shoulders. To her, this was the first day of the rest of our lives. To me, it felt like the last. We walked to the nearest cheap motel, the kind with flickering neon and peeling paint. I paid for 3 nights, knowing it was a foolish waste, but needing the illusion of a door to lock, a place to simply stop moving for a minute. The room was stale and damp. 2 beds with thin, scratchy blankets, a television bolted to the dresser. Maya immediately claimed the bed by the window and fell asleep, exhausted by the years of waiting for this day. I sat on the other bed, the manila folder on one side, the mysterious yellowed envelope on the other. I opened the folder first. Bills, legal notices, a birth certificate. The sterile, paper-based story of a life. My life. Then I picked up the envelope. My hands were trembling slightly. This felt different. This felt like touching a ghost. I carefully worked my finger under the flap, breaking a seal that had been set more than a decade ago. Inside, there wasn't a letter. It was a single, folded piece of paper, stiff and important. A deed. A quitclaim deed, to be specific. It transferred ownership of a 1.5-acre parcel of land in a county I'd never heard of, a place called Caldera County, about 200 miles north. The transfer was from some holding company to our mother, Eleanor Ross. The price listed on the deed was $1. Attached to it with a rusty paperclip was a receipt from the county assessor's office, a property tax payment, for $2. A grand total of $3 had bought this piece of nowhere. Tucked into the fold of the deed was a small, flat key, the kind for a padlock, its brass face tarnished green. And beneath it, a note. The handwriting was a looping, hurried cursive. It was our mother's. I knew it instinctively. "My sweet Leo, my brave Maya," it began. My breath hitched. It was the first time I'd seen her words, a message from a woman who was a complete stranger. "If you are reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I am so sorry. I am more sorry than you will ever know. This is all I have left to give you. It's not much, but it's safe. The world is loud, but this place is quiet. It's yours. The key is for the utility structure on the north end of the property. Don't be afraid of the dark. The best things are sometimes hidden there. Be good to each other. I love you more than all the stars." I read the note 3 times, then a 4th. The words blurred through a film of tears I refused to let fall. A utility structure. A key. A piece of land I didn't know existed. It was nothing. A patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere, probably worthless, which is why it only cost $3. It was a joke. a cruel, final joke from a universe that had never been on our side. I looked over at Maya, sleeping soundly, her face finally peaceful. She believed in me. She believed I had a plan. I looked at the pathetic stipend check, then back at the deed. A week in a motel, and then the street. Or a piece of land 200 miles away with a locked utility structure and a ghost's blessing. It wasn't a choice. It was the only straw I had left to grab. I folded the deed and the note, slipped them back into the envelope, and slid the key into my pocket. It felt heavy, like a stone. I lay back on the lumpy bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling, the sound of the highway outside a relentless hum. The world was loud, she had written. This place is quiet. For the first time in a long time, I wanted quiet. I wanted it more than anything. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Maya was still asleep, a thin line of drool on her pillow. For a moment, she looked like the little kid I remembered from our first foster home, the one who used to hide behind my legs. Now I was the only thing standing between her and the world. The thought was of physical weight pressing down on my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the deed again, spreading it on the stained nightstand. Caldera County. I'd never heard of it. I used the motel's spotty Wi-Fi on my cheap phone to look it up. It was exactly what I expected. Rural, sparsely populated, economically depressed. The kind of place people leave, not go to. There were a few blurry satellite images, mostly just dense patches of green and brown. I typed in the parcel number from the deed. A red pin dropped onto a patch of woods a few miles outside a tiny town called Harmony Springs. Population 412. The property itself looked like nothing, just trees. But when I zoomed in as far as the map would allow, I saw it. A faint gray square, almost perfectly camouflaged by the canopy. A concrete roof, the utility structure. It looked small, isolated, a forgotten relic. It was probably a pump house or an old generator shed. Or it was filled with spiders and snakes and hadn't been opened since the Cold War. It didn't matter. It was a roof, a place, ours. I looked at the bus schedule. A bus left at noon that would get us to a town about 20 miles from Harmony Springs. From there, we'd have to figure it out. Hitchhike, walk, whatever it took. Our money was a rapidly shrinking pile of paper. The motel, food for the trip, and 2 one-way tickets would take almost all of it. I cashed the stipend check at a predatory check-cashing place that took a huge cut, the man behind the plexiglass eyeing me with a mixture of pity and contempt. I bought 2 bus tickets, a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 bottles of water. The rest of the cash I folded into a tight square and hid deep in my sock. When I got back to the room, Maya was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed, watching morning cartoons with the volume turned low. She looked small against the oversized headboard. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice tight with a fear she was trying to hide. "Getting supplies," I said, trying to sound casual. I put the bread and peanut butter on the dresser. "We're leaving." She muted the TV. "Where are we going?" This was it, the moment I had to sell her on the craziest plan in the world. I had to make a derelict concrete box in the woods sound like a promise, not a punishment. I sat on her bed and pulled out the envelope. I showed her the deed. I showed her the key. And then I read her our mother's note. Her eyes, so much like mine, welled up as I read the words. She didn't cry, though. We'd learned long ago that tears didn't fix anything. When I finished, she just stared at the note in my hand. "She knew," Maya whispered. She knew we'd be alone. Yeah, I said. I think she did. Is it real? The land? It's real. I looked it up. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, and there's a building on it. The note says the key is for it. Maya reached out and touched the tarnished brass key, her fingertip tracing its edges. A house? She asked, her voice full of a hope that nearly broke my heart. I don't know, May. The note says a utility structure. It could be anything. It could be a tiny shed. It could be falling apart. I had to be honest with her. I couldn't sell her a fairy tale. But it's ours. No one can kick us out. No one can tell us what to do. It's a place to start. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. I could see the gears turning in her head, weighing the comfort of a known misery against the terror of an unknown hope. Finally she nodded, just a small, decisive dip of her chin. Okay, she said. Let's go home. The bus ride was long, 8 hours of watching the city skyline shrink in the rearview mirror, replaced by sprawling suburbs, then flat farmland, and finally the rolling, tree-covered hills of the state's northern counties. We sat in the back, our backpacks on our laps. We didn't talk much. We made a few peanut butter sandwiches and watched the world go by. Each mile felt like a step further away from the life we knew, a life of institutions and rules, and a step closer to something else. I didn't know if it was better. I just knew it was different, and it was ours. We got off the bus in a town called Junction City. It was little more than a gas station, a diner, and a post office. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Harmony Springs was another 20 miles down a 2-lane highway, and there were no more buses. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A cold wind was picking up. We stood by the side of the road, 2 kids with backpacks, looking utterly out of place. A few cars sped past, their drivers not even glancing our way. I could feel Maya's anxiety radiating next to me. "What do we do now, Leo?" she asked, her voice small. "We walk," I said. It was a stupid plan. 20 miles was a long way, and it would be dark soon. But I didn't know what else to do. We started walking along the gravel shoulder, the roar of the occasional passing truck making me flinch. After about an hour, as true darkness fell and the temperature dropped, a pair of headlights slowed down beside us. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck, its engine rattling. An old man with a face like a road map and a stained baseball cap leaned across the passenger seat. "You kids lost?" he grunted. I instinctively put my arm in front of Maya. "No, sir. Just heading to Harmony Springs." He squinted at us. "That's a hell of a walk in the dark. Bad idea. Coyotes get brave this time of night." He spat a stream of tobacco juice out his window. "Hop in the back. I'm going that way." I hesitated. Getting into a stranger's car was rule number 1 in the survival guide for kids like us. But sleeping in a ditch on the side of the highway wasn't a great option either. I looked at Maya. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you, sir," I said. We threw our bags into the truck bed and climbed in, sitting on the cold, ridged metal. The truck lurched forward, and the wind was sharp and biting. We huddled together for warmth, the stars blazing with an impossible brightness I'd never seen in the city. The man dropped us off at the edge of Harmony Springs. It was even smaller than I'd imagined. A single main street with a few darkened storefronts. A solitary blinking yellow light at the only intersection. Property you're looking for is about 3 miles down Old Caldera Road, the man said, pointing a gnarled finger. Ain't nothing out there but woods and that old concrete bunker. You ain't planning on squatting in that thing, are you? A bunker, not a pump house. A bunker. It's our family's property, I said, maybe a little too defensively. The man just shrugged. Suit yourself. Good luck. He drove off, his taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving us in an almost absolute silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets. We were close. I could feel it. We walked down the cracked pavement of Old Caldera Road, the woods on either side of us a wall of black. My phone had a little battery left, and its flashlight cut a weak, trembling beam in front of us. Finally, my map app showed we were there. There was no driveway, no gate, just a slight break in the trees and a rusted metal post with the faded parcel number barely visible. This was it, our 1.5 acres of nowhere. We pushed through the undergrowth, branches scratching at our faces and clothes. The air was thick with the smell of pine needles and decay. After about 100 yards, we saw it. The flashlight beam landed on a flat concrete slab nearly swallowed by moss and weeds, and in the center of the slab, a circle of rusted, heavy steel. A hatch. It was a bunker, a real military-grade bunker, half buried in a forgotten forest. My heart was pounding, a mixture of terror and a strange, exhilarating hope. I pulled the key from my pocket. Its teeth were a complex, unusual shape. I knelt down and cleared away the dirt and leaves from the lock mechanism. It was a heavy-duty padlock, seized with rust. For a horrible moment, I thought it wouldn't work. The key wouldn't turn. It was all for nothing. Push, I grunted to Maya. We both put our shoulders into the heavy hatch, trying to relieve some of the pressure on the lock. I put both hands on the key and turned with everything I had. There was a grating, screaming shriek of metal on metal, a sound that seemed to tear the silence of the woods. Then, a loud click. The lock sprang open. We'd done it. Together we put our fingers under the edge of the hatch. It was incredibly heavy. We strained, our muscles burning, grunting with the effort. Slowly, groaning in protest, the hatch began to lift. A wave of cold, stale air washed over us, a smell like a tomb, of damp concrete and trapped time. It was the smell of absolute darkness. I pointed my phone's flashlight down into the opening. A steep metal ladder descended into a black void. "Don't be afraid of the dark," our mother's note had said. I took a deep breath. "You ready?" I asked Maya. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the darkness below. "I'll go first," I said. I swung my legs over the edge and started down the ladder, my feet finding the cold, narrow rungs. The light from my phone barely penetrated the oppressive black. Down, down, down. About 15 feet. My boots hit a solid floor. A concrete floor. I swept the light around. We were in a single, large, square room, maybe 25 by 25 feet. The walls were thick, poured concrete, streaked with years of condensation. The air was frigid and still. The room was empty. Utterly, completely empty. Except for a layer of dust and dirt on the floor, and in the far corner, a dark rectangular shape. A large green military-style footlocker, bound with metal straps. It sat there like a coffin. I called up to Maya. "It's okay. Come on down." Her silhouette appeared in the square of starry sky above, and she carefully made her way down the ladder. When she reached the bottom, she stood beside me, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. She looked around the empty concrete box, her face unreadable in the wavering light. "This is it?" she whispered. "This is home?" The word hung in the cold, dead air. It was a tomb, a concrete prison buried in the ground. All that hope, the long journey, had led us to this, an empty, freezing box. For a second, I felt despair wash over me, so total and complete that I wanted to just sit down on the floor and give up. We'd made a terrible mistake. But then my light found the footlocker again. It was the only object in the entire space. It was placed there for a reason. "Not yet," I said, my voice echoing slightly. "But maybe what we need is in there." We walked over to it. It was heavy steel, probably army surplus. It had 2 latches on the front, but they weren't padlocked. They were just rusted shut. I took out the small multi-tool I'd had since I was 12, a birthday gift from a foster father who'd actually been kind. I worked the pliers into the gap and started prying at the first latch. The rust fought back. It took 10 minutes of scraping and straining before the first latch gave way with a sharp crack. We did the same on the second. Finally, with a groan of stressed metal, it popped open. We looked at each other. This was the moment. The answer to every question we'd ever had was probably inside this box. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the heavy lid. The smell that wafted out was not of decay, but of paper and time, and a faint, faded perfume. My flashlight beam fell upon the contents. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a weapon. It was a life, packed into a box. On top was a stack of photographs, tied with a simple piece of twine. I picked them up. The first one was of a young woman with our mother's eyes, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Me. The next was her, a little older, holding the hand of a toddler while a new baby sat on her lap. Maya. Her smile was real, bright. It was a smile I'd never seen before. Beneath the photos were letters, dozens of them, bundled and tied. They were addressed to us. To Leo on his 5th birthday. To Maya on her first day of school. A whole childhood of milestones, documented in letters that were never sent. My throat closed up. She hadn't forgotten us. She had been with us, in her own way, the entire time. And then I saw the money. Underneath the letters was a thick, waterproof bag. Inside were stacks of cash, 20s, 50s, hundreds. I pulled it out and counted it. It wasn't a king's ransom. It was just over $8,000. It was enough. Enough to survive. Enough to start. But there was one more thing at the very bottom of the chest. A small, portable cassette player, the kind that was popular in the 90s. And next to it, a single cassette tape in a clear plastic case. On the label, in that same looping cursive, were 4 words. For Leo and Maya. I picked it up, my hand shaking. This was it, the real story. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as she looked at a photo of our mother holding her as a baby. "Maya," I said softly. I showed her the tape. She nodded, understanding immediately. I clicked the cassette into the player. I pressed the play button. There was a soft hiss of static, the whir of the tape turning. And then a voice I hadn't heard in 12 years, but recognized in the deepest part of my soul. It was our mother. "Leo? Maya?" Her voice was soft but strained, laced with an exhaustion that went bone deep. She sounded like she was in a small room, trying not to be overheard. "If you're hearing this, if you found this place, then I'm gone, and I am so, so sorry. There's so much I need to explain, so much I need you to understand." We sat on the cold concrete floor, huddled together in the dark, and listened to the voice of a ghost. "I know you must hate me," she said, her voice cracking. "I know you must think I abandoned you. I need you to know that's not true. Every single day since I left you has been a torment. Putting you into the system, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was the only way I could keep you safe." She took a shaky breath. "Your father, he wasn't a good man. When I met him, I was young and stupid, and he was charming. But that charm was a mask. He was involved in things, dangerous things, a criminal network. He wasn't a kingpin, just a low-level enforcer. But that made him more dangerous. He was violent, unpredictable. When I found out I was pregnant with you, Leo, I thought it would change him. It didn't. It made him worse. He saw you as a possession, his property. The bunker felt colder, the darkness heavier. I tried to leave him, many times. He always found me. He told me that if I ever tried to take his kids, he would hunt us down and he would end it. For all of us. I believed him. After Maya was born, it got worse. I knew I couldn't stay. But I couldn't just run. He had eyes everywhere. He would have found us in a week. Her voice dropped to a whisper. So I came up with a different plan. A terrible plan. The only one I could think of. I had to make you disappear. Not by running, but by hiding you in plain sight. In the one place he would never think to look. The foster care system. He saw you as his property. He would never believe I would give you up to the state. He would look for runaways, not for wards of the court. I looked at Maya. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. This whole time we thought we were thrown away, but we were hidden. I saved every penny I could. I sold the one thing I had of value, a ring my grandmother gave me. It was enough to buy this piece of land, this bunker. It's an old Cold War communications outpost, decommissioned, forgotten. I bought it through a shell company for almost nothing. This was supposed to be our escape. My plan was to let a few years pass, let him think I had vanished, maybe even died. And then, when you were old enough, I was going to come for you, get you out of the system, bring you here. We would have a new start, new names. The money in this box, that was our new life. It's not much, but it was everything I had. There was a long pause on the tape, just the sound of her quiet, ragged breathing. "But he found me," she finally said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I don't know how. I thought I'd covered my tracks. I'm recording this now because he's coming. I know he is. I don't have much time. I can't lead him to you. I can't let him know you exist. So I'm leading him away. I'm going to make him chase me, far away from here, far away from you both. I don't think I'll get away this time." The tape clicked. The players stopped. Silence. The absolute, crushing silence of the bunker rushed back in, a physical force. Maya let out a sob, a raw, wounded sound that she'd held in for years. I pulled her into my arms, and we just held each other. Two orphans in a concrete tomb, the truth a weight heavier than the earth above us. Our mother wasn't a memory. She was a hero. She hadn't abandoned us. She had sacrificed herself for us. I cried. For the first time since I was a little boy, I cried. I cried for the mother I never got to know. I cried for the years we'd spent feeling worthless and unwanted. I cried for her, alone and terrified, recording a final message for the children she was about to die for. And I cried for us, sitting in the dark, with a ghost's last words, a box of letters, and a stack of money that felt like it was soaked in blood. The bunker was no longer an empty box. It was a sanctuary. It was a memorial. It was the last will and testament of a woman who had loved us more than her own life. Listening to her voice, hearing the truth, it broke something open inside me. The anger I'd carried for years, the hard shell I'd built around myself, it all just shattered. All that was left was a deep, aching grief and a new, terrifying clarity. Our whole lives, we had been running from a ghost. Now, we had a new one to contend with, the ghost of our father. The danger she had died to protect us from. What did that mean for us? Was he still out there? Would he ever come looking for his property? The $8,000 wasn't just a new start anymore. It was a choice. We could take it and run, disappear just like she had planned, start over somewhere new with new names, and always be looking over our shoulders. Or we could stay. We could stay here on this piece of land she had bought for us. We could honor her sacrifice not by running, but by living, by building the life she never got to have. I didn't know which choice was right. All I knew was that we couldn't stay on that cold floor forever. After what felt like hours, Maya's sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. She pulled away and wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "She loved us," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact she was holding on to like a life raft. "Yeah," I said, my own voice hoarse. "She really did." We sat in silence for a while longer. The bunker didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt sacred. It was the only place in the world that was truly ours, bought and paid for with our mother's love. I've heard people say that when you face a great trauma, you get a moment of absolute clarity. For me, that moment came in the freezing dark, surrounded by the smell of concrete and damp earth. If you've ever had a moment that completely changed how you saw your past, a moment that redefined everything you thought you knew, I want you to know you're not alone. It's a heavy burden, that kind of truth. Let me know in the comments what that felt like for you. We read every single one, and your stories, your moments of clarity, they matter just as much as mine. Now, let's get back to what happened in that cold, dark place. The first night in the bunker was the longest night of my life. We didn't have blankets, just our thin jackets. We huddled together on the floor for warmth, using our backpacks as pillows. We didn't sleep. We just lay there, listening to the profound silence, the story of our lives rewritten. The next morning, the patch of sky visible through the hatch turned from black to gray to a pale, washed-out blue. We were stiff, cold, and hungry. But we were different. The despair was gone, replaced by something else, a fragile, fierce sense of purpose. "What do we do now, Leo?" Maya asked. Her voice was different too. The childish fear was gone. She was asking for a plan, not for a rescue. I sat up and looked around the empty concrete room. It was ugly, cold, and forbidding. But it was solid. It was safe. It was ours. "We stay," I said. The words came out with a certainty that surprised me. "We don't run. This is what she left us. We're going to make it a home." A flicker of something I hadn't seen in years crossed Maya's face. A genuine smile. It was small and tentative, but it was there. "Okay," she said. "How?" That was the question. How do you turn a concrete box into a home with $8,000 and no experience? The answer was, one step at a time. The first step was light and air. We propped the heavy hatch open with a sturdy log we found outside, letting sunlight and fresh air spill down the ladder for the first time in decades. The sunlight revealed the true state of the place. The walls were covered in a thin layer of grime. The floor was thick with dust and rodent droppings. It was disgusting. But it was just dirt. Dirt could be cleaned. We spent the first 2 days just cleaning. We had no supplies, so we improvised. We used our extra t-shirts as rags and water from the bottles I'd bought. We swept the floor with a makeshift broom made from a branch and pine needles. It was back-breaking, filthy work. By the end of the second day, the concrete was still stained and ugly, but the filth was gone. It was an empty, clean box. That small victory felt monumental. The next step was a trip to town. We hid the cash, the letters, and the photos back in the footlocker, covered it with a tarp we'd found tangled in the woods, and walked the 3 miles back to Harmony Springs. Seeing it in the daylight didn't make it any more impressive. It was a town that time had forgotten. A hardware store, a small grocery, a diner, and a library. That was it. Our first stop was the hardware store. It was run by a man named Gus, who had a kind, weathered face and hands as rough as sandpaper. He looked at us, 2 dirty kids in worn-out clothes, with a curiosity that wasn't hostile. "Can I help you?" he asked. I had a list, a long one. I'd spent the night scribbling it down. "We need a lot," I said, feeling foolish. "We're fixing up an old place out on Caldera Road." Gus raised an eyebrow. "The old bunker? Lord have mercy. Thought that thing was sealed for good." "It's ours," Maya said from behind me, her voice firm. Gus looked from her to me, and his expression softened. He saw the determination in her eyes. He didn't ask any more questions about ownership. He just nodded. "All right, what's on the list?" We bought a small second-hand gas generator. We bought work lights, heavy-duty extension cords, buckets, mops, bleach, and a propane camp stove. We bought 2 thick sleeping bags, 2 foam sleeping pads, and a cooler. The bill came to over $1,000. Handing over that much of our mother's money made my stomach clench. But as Gus helped us load everything into a rusty old cart he let us borrow, I knew it was the right thing to do. This wasn't spending money, it was investing it. In us. In our home. Getting the generator running was our first real challenge. Neither of us knew anything about engines. We spent hours reading the manual by flashlight, fumbling with the gas and oil, pulling the cord until our arms ached. Finally, with a sputtering cough and a plume of blue smoke, it roared to life. I plugged in the work light, and for the first time, the bunker was filled with bright, steady, artificial light. The transformation was instantaneous. It was no longer a dark tomb. It was a workspace. It was a room. That night, we ate canned chili heated on the camp stove, sitting on our new sleeping pads. The generator hummed away outside, a reassuring sound in the vast wilderness. We were warm. We were fed. We had light. It was the most luxurious meal of my life. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. We worked from sunup to sundown. We scrubbed the walls with bleach until our hands were raw. We painted them with a cheap, bright white paint that made the space feel bigger, cleaner. We bought plywood and 2x4s and, with Gus's patient advice and a book from the town library, we built a partition wall, creating a small, separate sleeping area for Maya. It was clumsy, the cuts weren't straight, but it was a room, her own room. She decorated it with some of the photos of our mother. We built shelves. We built a small counter for the camp stove. We found a nearby stream with clear, cold water, and we hauled it back in 5-gallon buckets for washing and cleaning. Every day, the bunker looked a little less like a military installation and a little more like a strange, minimalist cabin. We made mistakes. I nearly cut my thumb off with a handsaw. Maya accidentally knocked over a can of paint. We argued, driven by exhaustion and frustration. But at the end of each day, we'd sit outside by the hatch, watch the sunset through the trees, and feel a sense of accomplishment that was entirely new. We were building something, with our own hands. One day, while clearing some of the overgrown brush around the bunker's entrance, my shovel hit something hard. It wasn't a rock. I dug around it and uncovered a metal lid. It was a wellhead, a hand pump, rusted but intact. I spent 2 days working on it, soaking it in penetrating oil, cleaning the mechanism. With Maya's help, we put a long pipe wrench on the handle and pushed with all our weight. There was a groan, a shudder, and then, with a screech, the handle moved. We pumped, and we pumped, and we pumped. At first, only rusty brown sludge came out. We were about to give up. Then the water started to clear, and finally a stream of clean, cold, fresh water poured from the spout. We whooped and cheered, splashing our faces with it. Water. We had running water. We didn't have to haul it from the stream anymore. It felt like we'd struck gold. The community in Harmony Springs slowly, cautiously began to accept us. Gus at the hardware store always had a piece of advice for me. The librarian, a woman named Sarah, let Maya use the computers for as long as she wanted, helping her enroll in online schooling. The owner of the diner would slip us extra food when we came in for a rare treat. They didn't ask about our parents. They didn't ask where we came from. They just saw 2 kids working hard, trying to make a life for themselves, and they responded with a quiet, rural kindness. They didn't solve our problems, but they made us feel like we weren't entirely alone. The money dwindled, but we were smart with it. We learned to garden. We tilled a small patch of earth near the bunker and planted vegetables. Watching those first green shoots push through the soil felt like a miracle. It was food we had grown ourselves. It was another step toward independence. Months turned into a year. The bunker was home. It was strange, and it was unconventional, but it was ours. We had light, we had water, we had warmth from a small wood-burning stove we'd installed. We had a home. The letters from our mother we kept in the footlocker. On the birthdays and holidays she'd written them for, we would take them out and read them. Her voice, her love, became a living part of our new life. The fear of our father, of the danger she'd warned us about, faded. It didn't disappear. It was a low hum in the background of our lives, a reason to be cautious, to be quiet, to be strong. But it didn't rule us. We were not our mother's fear. We were her hope. We had chosen to stay, and in doing so, we had chosen to live. One evening, about 2 years after we'd arrived, I was sitting on the roof of the bunker, which had become our porch, our deck. The sun was setting, and the woods were quiet. Maya came and sat next to me. She was 16 now, the age I was when we'd arrived. She was no longer a scared kid. She was strong, smart, and confident. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly. I looked around at our little homestead, the neat stack of firewood, the thriving garden, the faint light glowing from the open hatch. "Where would we go?" I asked. "This is home." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Yeah," she said, "it is." I thought back to that first night, huddled in the dark, feeling so completely lost. I thought about our mother's voice on the tape, about her impossible choice. She had given us this land, this bunker, thinking it would be a hiding place, a place to disappear. But it had become the opposite. It had become the place where we had finally found ourselves. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a crucible. The hard work, the isolation, the constant challenge of it, it had forged us into different people. It had bonded us together in a way that no normal childhood ever could have. The bunker had forced us to be resilient, to be resourceful, to depend on each other completely. Our mother hadn't just left us a place, she had left us a project, a purpose. The work of building a home had healed us. It had taken our grief and our fear and turned it into something solid, something real. It turned it into walls and a roof and a garden. It turned it into a future. I realized then that the greatest inheritance she had given us wasn't the land or the money or even the truth. It was the choice. The choice to build something out of the wreckage. The choice to create a home where there was only a hole in the ground. The threat from our past never materialized. Our father never came. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he was in prison. Maybe he simply never cared enough to look. In the end, it didn't matter. His story was over. Ours was just beginning. We had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to us, and we had turned it into the best thing in our lives. We had taken an inheritance of fear and transformed it into a legacy of hope. That rusted, forgotten bunker didn't just change us, it saved us. It gave us back to ourselves. That bunker taught me something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Home isn't something you find. It's not a place you move into. It's something you build. With your own hands, with sweat, with tears. Sometimes you have to build it in the most unlikely of places, out of the most broken pieces. You have to lay the foundation on top of your own pain and build the walls out of your own resilience. Maybe you're not building a home in a derelict bunker, but we're all building something. A life, a career, a family, a second chance. We're all trying to make a safe place for ourselves in a world that can feel cold and unforgiving. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't build a future out of the broken pieces of your past. Don't ever believe that where you come from has to define where you're going. The most beautiful things are often built on the ugliest foundations. The strongest homes are the ones built to withstand a storm. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with that part of you that knows what it's like to fight for your place in the world, please subscribe and become part of this community we're building here. And I want you to share your own story in the comments below. Tell us what you're building. Tell us about the time you turned nothing into something. Because every one of those stories deserves to be told, and every one of those homes deserves to be celebrated. Thank you for listening.